has risen from approximately 19.5 million in 25 to over 22 million in 2026. And we heard the very grim reality described by Ms. Vosorno just now. While the European Union remains the leading donor, also in 2026, urgent additional international financing is needed to avoid a repeat of last year's critically underfunded response. Notably, this plan was developed before the latest escalation in the Middle East and does not yet account for the economic shocks from disrupted maritime routes, nor the Houthis ramping up hostilities. These factors that stretch supply chains and will likely exacerbate an already devastating humanitarian emergency even further. Ongoing floods add to the devastation, displacing the population, damaging vital infrastructure, and heightening the urgency of humanitarian aid. And we strongly condemned, again, the continued detention of 73 United Nations and humanitarian personnel, which is unacceptable under any circumstances. And moreover, each additional day of detention undermines critical relief operations. And we call, yet again, for the immediate and unconditional release and stress the obligation of all parties to ensure the safety, security and unimpeded access of humanitarian workers. Third, we would like to acknowledge the ongoing efforts by the government of Yemen to stabilize the governance amid extraordinarily difficult circumstances. In this regard, Latvia welcomes the recent statement by the IMF Executive Board issued following the resumed Article 4 consultations with Yemen, which recognized the government's steps and commitment that have contributed to stabilizing the economy and enabling the delivery of essential public services. As significant downside risks remain, we encourage the continuation of these policies. It also remains important to continue efforts to stabilize the situation in the southern governorates and advance towards a sustained and inclusive dialogue in the south of Yemen. Likewise, we encourage all diplomatic initiatives for a comprehensive and inclusive political process involving all relevant parties across Yemen, and with the full and meaningful participation of women under the auspices of the United Nations. And Latvia reiterates its strong and unwavering support for the Special Envoy's indispensable mediation efforts, now also enhanced by the core tasks of UNMAHA. In conclusion, Madam President, let me underscore that amid the regional escalation, all Yemeni parties must maintain momentum in advancing political dialogue and focus on urgent domestic priorities. And no actor must impede this path. Yemeni's lives, dignity and aspirations must remain central to every decision. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and OCHA Director Edim Vosornu for their comprehensive briefings. I appreciate the sustained efforts of the Special Envoy in advancing stability and supporting a peaceful resolution in Yemen. The situation in Yemen remains deeply concerning and continues to demand sustained international attention. Despite ongoing engagement by the UN, the political process continues to face persistent challenges. There is genuine expectation that efforts towards a comprehensive settlement must deliver tangible progress, while also carefully accounting for the evolving realities on the ground. Unfortunately, Yemen's internal dynamics further complicate the peace process. The Presidential Leadership Council is the internationally recognized and legitimate authority. However, the presence of competing actors with divergent political agendas, particularly in the south, continues to undermine unity and hinder efforts to establish a coherent national framework. This fragmentation risks weakening state institutions and obstructing progress towards a comprehensive political settlement. In this context, it is essential that all parties and Yemeni stakeholders demonstrate renewed political will, engage constructively with the Special Envoy, and participate in an inclusive, UN-facilitated, Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned political process. Such a process must move beyond incremental measures and preserve the unity, sovereignty and territorial integrity of Yemen while reflecting the legitimate aspirations of the Yemeni people. At the same time, Developments in Yemen cannot be viewed in isolation from the evolving regional security environment. Yemen must not be adversely affected or drawn into a regional conflict. It is also important to stress that attacks targeting maritime routes are unacceptable, as they disrupt global trade flows, heighten risks to energy and food supply chains, and would accentuate the growing regionalization of the conflict. The free and unimpeded flow of commercial shipping through the Bab al-Mandab must not be impeded. The risk of Yemen becoming further entangled in wider regional confrontation, including through the involvement of non-state actors, must be avoided. It is therefore essential that all parties exercise the utmost restraint, refrain from actions that could escalate tensions, and fully comply with their obligations under international law. Madam President, the humanitarian situation remains dire and requires urgent, coordinated and sustained action. According to OCHA's 2026 Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan, 22.3 million people require humanitarian assistance and protection, while 18.3 million face acute food insecurity, and another 19.3 million need access to essential health service. This is a serious humanitarian crisis. In this regard, it is incumbent upon international donors to urgently increase predictable and flexible humanitarian funding, upon all parties on the ground to ensure safe, rapid and unhindered humanitarian access, and upon UN and OCHA to continue coordinating and delivering assistance effectively to those most in need. Without these coordinated, collective and concrete steps, the humanitarian situation risks further deterioration. Pakistan reiterates its strong condemnation of the continued arbitrary detention of UN, humanitarian personnel and diplomatic staff, as well as unlawful seizure of UN premises and assets in area under Houthi control. These actions contravene international law and undermine humanitarian work. We call for the immediate and unconditional release of all detained personnel and for full respect for the privileges and immunities of UN personnel, facilities and assets. Madam President, the sustained engagement remains fundamental to advance the goal of a comprehensive political settlement supported by a stable regional environment and complemented by robust humanitarian assistance. That is the only viable path forward. The Security Council must continue to play a constructive and unified role in advancing these efforts with a clear focus on peace, stability and the well-being of the Yemeni people. I thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to thank the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen, Hans Grunberg, and the Director of the Crisis Response Division of OCHA, Edem Wosornu, for their valuable contributions. We would like to extend our most cordial welcome to the representative of Yemen to this meeting. Over a decade of conflict has left Yemen with grave humanitarian needs and generalized displacement. According to the International Organization for Migration, in 2026, over 22.3 Yemenis require humanitarian assistance. This includes 10.95 million women and girls, among them 1.3 million pregnant and breastfeeding women that need specific support when it comes to protection and basic services. Throughout the last year, our request and support to the Special Envoy Hans Grunberg have been focused on his efforts to secure the release of humanitarian workers arbitrarily detained. We would like to thank him for his efforts and we reiterate our support to him. Nevertheless, unfortunately, in less than a week, we've observed how this number of detainees has increased to 73 people. This includes representatives of the United Nations, national and international NGOs, as well as members of civil society and the diplomatic corps. These despicable acts carried out by the Houthis hinder the efforts of this organization to support communities throughout Yemen, promote peace, prevent a greater escalation of the conflict, and defend the rights of all Yemenis who remain trapped in a situation of continuous violence. The absurd attempt by the Houthis to use the conflict in the Middle East is proof of this group's selfishness. They are willing to sacrifice the tranquility and general well-being of Yemen in order to gain prominence. Madam President, the military actions that have extended throughout the Middle East are, of course, creating direct consequences that are beginning to be felt throughout all countries in the region. Yemen is not the exception. The obstruction of the Strait of Hormuz has caused a spike in energy prices with impacts that go beyond regional borders. Therefore, we reiterate our firm and unwavering position. No critical maritime route should be threatened, nor used as an instrument for pressure or blackmail. The Red Sea, the Strait of Hormuz, or any other strategic route should not be put at risk, nor should they be closed. Maritime security is one of the fundamental pillars of global economic stability. Given the aforementioned, we underline the need for this Council to remain constantly vigilant over the evolution of events in Yemen. We also urge the government of Yemen to provide continuity for the Southern Dialogue as a critical mechanism to promote inclusion, strengthen political dialogue, and advance national reconciliation. Only through a process that is participative, inclusive, and sustained over time will it be possible to consolidate a lasting peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Madam President, we wish to thank Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and Adam Vosornu for their briefings. The process of Yemeni resolution has for a number of years now been stagnant, and the latest U.S.-Israeli aggression targeting Iran has brought into this situation new, unpredictable changes and shifts. Washington and Western Europe have generated large-scale escalation in the Middle East, and unfortunately, the Yemeni Ansar Allah movement has found itself dragged into this situation, and this has generated risks of even greater alienation of prospects for normalization. Against the backdrop of regional turbulence, we do not see indications of a resumption of proactive efforts on the roadmap for resolution in Yemen, which began more than 2 years ago, which has not yet brought about any tangible result. The lack of progress in the peace process and growing mistrust among the Yemeni protagonists is generating, in turn, an ongoing deterioration of the military situation along their line of contact. All of this is generating risks of reigniting the hot phase of the civil war. Madam President, we believe that the main task of the membership of the Security Council on the Yemeni front is to do everything possible to promptly and expeditiously normalize the situation in that country. Current-day developments clearly bear this out. There's a need to focus all efforts in helping the parties to the conflict, including the Ansar Allah movement, to find common ground and to foster compromise. At the same time, it is important to prompt the parties to renounce mutual recriminations and mistrust. Small steps in one another's direction, including the exchange of prisoners of war, can help to bring this about. The optimal basis for comprehensive and long-term resolution in Yemen remains the above-mentioned roadmap, the updated version of which should be signed by all Yemeni parties without delay. In this connection, we support the efforts of the Special Envoy, and we call for the pursuit of ongoing and other trajectories within the robust configuration of mediation efforts. For our part, we stand ready to do everything possible to facilitate this. Furthermore, we will continue to engage in constructive cooperation with the official Yemeni authorities as well as influential political forces in the country. This includes the Ansar Allah movement as well as with our friends and our partners in the region. We call upon other members of the international community to follow suit. We caution them against attempts to antagonize or to isolate any of the Yemeni parties, including the Houthis. The Houthis represent an integral component of the Yemeni political landscape. Without their engagement, the resolution is doomed to failure. Madam President, there is a need for urgent action to be undertaken to address the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Yemen. Nearly half of the population, 20 million people, need humanitarian assistance in one form or another. There are grave problems related to food security, drinking water, medicine, access to medical institutions that are plaguing the country. A large share of those in need are internally displaced persons. We see a glaring, chronic underfinancing for specialized humanitarian programs. The situation is further escalated by the forced reduction of humanitarian coverage by UN agencies owing to the unresolved issues with the humanitarian personnel who have been detained by the Houthis. Presently, the lion's share of assistance deliveries to Yemeni people is being shouldered by non-governmental structures who remain present in regions under Ansar Allah control. However, these organizations, by definition, do not possess the resources which are available to the international organization, the United Nations. Under these circumstances, it is an important principle for the architecture for humanitarian assistance in that country to remain unchanged. There is a need to provide for sustained access to preserve the space for humanitarian activity and to raise the level of protection for humanitarian personnel. We recall the importance of prioritization of preserving UN presence in all of the country's territory. To conclude, we reaffirm our commitment to Yemen's unity, sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
I would like to thank the President for convening this briefing, as well as the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen, Mr. Hans Grunberg, and the Director of the Crisis Response Division, Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, Ms. Edem Osorno. For their respective presentations, I would like to greet the delegations that are with us today. Mr. President, Colombia reforms its full support to the good offices of the Special Envoy and the humanitarian work carried out by the UN system in Yemen. My country also endorses its support to a political process that is broad and inclusive and ensures the unity, sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Yemen, and that at the very same time allows for some relief for the suffering of the civilian population, especially in a regional context characterized by growing tensions and risks of escalation. My delegation is closely following the complex combination of challenges that Yemen is facing today, on top of persistent internal tensions, including institutional fragility, and the recent incidents that happened in the south of the country. There is a real risk that the country could be dragged into a broader regional confrontation. In this context, it is extremely important to avoid an escalation of the conflict and preserve the progress achieved. Colombia reiterates the Special Envoy's emphasis on the need to reactivate a political process that reflects the current realities in Yemen and that produces tangible results. In that framework, my country considers that it is vital to adopt a comprehensive approach that coherently articulates the political, economic, and security dimensions in order to create trust among the parties and establish a solid basis for sustainable peace. The humanitarian situation continues to be alarming. The arbitrary detention of UN and humanitarian staff is particularly alarming, as well as the suspension or reduction of essential operations. This has a direct and negative impact on the supply of vital services. Colombia, therefore, reiterates our call for the immediate and unconditional release of all UN and humanitarian personnel that remains detained. We also call for ensuring safe, sustained, and unrestricted access based on international humanitarian law. Mr. President, our coherent and sustained support contributes to creating favorable conditions for a sustainable peace. We are convinced of this. This is why Colombia reaffirms its commitment to continue supporting the efforts of the United Nations and the international community geared towards stabilizing Yemen. I thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Colombia for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and OCHA Director Adam Wozournou for their insightful briefings. I also welcome the participation of the permanent representative of Yemen in this meeting. Mr. President, I would like to make the following points. First, Yemen remains at the edge of plunging deeper into a protracted security and humanitarian crisis exacerbated by regional instability and severe humanitarian and socio-economic repercussions deriving from a prolonged conflict. The Houthis' arbitrary decision to engage militarily against Israel with the launch of ballistic missile and drone attacks in the Tel Aviv area is both deplorable and condemnable. It is imperative to safeguard Yemen from any further escalation that risks dragging the country into a regional conflict, thus endangering profoundly its prospects of stability, peace, and humanitarian recovery. Second, unimpeded passage of commercial and merchant vessels must be always safeguarded, thus keeping international maritime trade routes continuously open and safe. Freedom of navigation and maritime security in the Red Sea region remain critical, all the more in light of prolonged disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz. Houthis' persistent threats of imminent attacks against international commercial vessels transiting Bab al-Mandeb and the Red Sea further aggravate an already fragile security environment, placing international shipping, global energy and food supply chains, as well as international trade stability, at considerable risk. EU naval operations Aspides, within its defensive mandate, plays a crucial role in safeguarding freedom of navigation in the Red Sea region and ensuring the protection of international shipping. Greece will continue to actively support the operation and its objectives. Third, the resumption of peace negotiations aiming at a permanent and viable peace solution on the Yemeni conflict is vital and long overdue. There is no substitute to negotiation efforts for achieving a lasting and enduring peace through an inclusive, Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned political process under the auspices of the United Nations, with full respect to the country's unity, sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity. In this context, we reiterate our unwavering support to Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and on his enduring efforts to revitalize the peace process. Fourth, ensuring a safe and enabling humanitarian environment remains of high priority. We reiterate our strong call for the immediate and unconditional release of all United Nations personnel, humanitarian workers, of non-governmental organizations and diplomatic mission staff who continue to be arbitrarily detained by the Houthis. The protection of UN personnel and the inviolability of UN premises must be upheld at all times in accordance with international law. Lastly, Mr. President, we further welcome the 2026 Yemen Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan, which provides a focused and prioritized framework for delivering life-saving assistance and essential protection services to all Yemenis in need. Sustained and predictable financial support remains of essence in addressing the scale and urgency of the humanitarian crisis. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to our briefers. The Houthis escalated their destabilizing activity in the region by launching missile and drone attacks against Israel on at least 6 occasions, most recently on April 4th. They have made common cause with the Islamic Republic of Iran and acted in support of its violations of international law. The Houthis' willingness to drag Yemen into conflict for the sake of its benefactors in Tehran is the latest demonstration of its total disregard for the people of Yemen. Inside Yemen, the Houthis continue to detain, attack, and terrorize their fellow Yemenis. On March 16th, the Houthis launched a missile strike against Yemeni families gathered after an iftar meal, killing 10 people, including 6 children. This was preceded by the forced disappearance of several Sunni imams, part of a larger pattern of Houthi repression of Sunni religious practices. Moreover, the Houthis have unjustly detained more than 70 UN staff, along with humanitarian workers and other staff of civil society organizations in diplomatic missions, including the U.S. mission. We call for their immediate and unconditional release. The Iranian regime has long enabled the Houthis' destabilizing activities through the supply of arms and related material and logistical and intelligence support. This is in clear defiance of this Council's resolutions. We call on all vessels bound for Houthi-controlled ports to comply with the UN verification and inspection mechanism requirements, as the Republic of Yemen Ministry of Transportation has reiterated to international shipping companies and port authorities. Colleagues, Resolution 2817 represented the international community's consensus that we cannot sit idly by as the Iranian regime and its proxies and partners undermine regional and international stability. All member states must abide by resolutions to deprive the Houthis of the resources needed for their destabilizing activities. Thank you.
I thank the representative of United States for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Mr. President, I wish first and foremost to thank the Special Envoy of the Secretary General, Mr. Hans Grunberg, as well as the Director of the Crisis Response Division of OCHA, Madam Edem Wosornu, for their briefings. I also welcome the presence among us of the Permanent Representative of Yemen. Mr. President, first and foremost, France condemns in the strongest terms the missile strikes perpetrated by the Houthis against Israel in recent days. These strikes have resulted in regional escalation. France calls for utmost restraint and for an immediate halt to any military operations in order to prevent further spread of the conflict. Moreover, France recalls our unstinting support for maritime security and for the freedom of navigation. We will continue in this regard to maintain and uphold our commitment under the European Union Defence Maritime Security Operation, EU NAVFOR Aspides, in accordance with international law and together with our European and international partners. Second, France demands the immediate, unconditional release of all United Nations personnel, as well as NGO staff and those of diplomatic missions who have been arbitrarily detained by the Houthis. These detentions fly in the face of international law, and they have lasted for far too long. As we recalled less than a week ago, attacks against humanitarian personnel are unacceptable. Security Council Resolution 2730 must be complied with. These acts impede deliveries of humanitarian assistance, which the Yemeni people desperately need at a time when the situation continues to deteriorate. The recent United Nations assessment is categorical. As compared to 2025, 2.8, as of 2025, 2.8 million additional people need humanitarian assistance. Children and women are particularly vulnerable. Third, France recalls our commitment to the unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Yemen. We support the efforts of consolidation of the Yemeni government, which are conducted by said government, and we reiterate our support to the new government, which needs to work towards stabilization of the country and to meet the basic needs of their people. We will continue to undertake efforts to support legitimate authorities for the benefit of the population. France also supports the prospects of the conduct in Saudi Arabia of an inclusive dialogue for resolution to the question of the south of Yemen, as was announced early this year by President Alimi. France, lastly, reaffirms our full support for the efforts of the Special Envoy, whose efforts are of critical importance. France calls upon all Yemeni stakeholders to engage in good faith in efforts with a view to resuming the political process under the aegis of the United Nations, which alone can help to establish a lasting peace in Yemen. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for the statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Bahrain.
Your Excellencies, I would like to thank Mr. Hans Grunberg, the Special Envoy of the Secretary General to Yemen, and Ms. Adam Wosorno, Director of Operations and Advocacy at the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, for their valuable briefings. I also welcome the participation of the permanent representative of the Brotherly Republic of Yemen, His Excellency Ambassador Abdullah Al-Sadi. At this critical juncture facing the Arab Gulf region, in light of the serious security and economic challenges it is experiencing, the question of preserving Yemen's stability takes on particular importance. This necessitates sparing Yemen the repercussions of these tensions, avoiding its entanglement in regional conflicts that would further complicate its crisis and prolong the suffering of its people, or turning its territory into a platform for the implementation of Iranian agendas. This, in turn, would help advance the political process toward a comprehensive and sustainable solution that fulfills the aspirations of the brotherly Yemeni people for security, stability, and development. In this context, we would like to underscore the following points. First, reaffirming full support for the Presidential Leadership Council, headed by His Excellency Dr. Rashad Al-Alemi, and for the efforts undertaken by the Yemeni government to advance development and reconstruction, preserve security and stability, and reach a comprehensive political settlement in accordance with the Gulf Initiative and its implementation mechanism, as well as the outcomes of the Comprehensive National Dialogue Conference and Security Council Resolution 2216. This is in a manner that preserves Yemen's sovereignty, unity, territorial integrity, and independence. In this regard, we reiterate our support for the efforts of the UN and its Special Envoy to Yemen, Mr. Hans Grunberg, to reach a comprehensive political solution that meets and fulfills the aspirations of the Yemeni people for security, stability, and prosperity. Second, in light of the harsh humanitarian conditions and the severe deterioration of food security in Yemen, the Houthi militia continues to threaten to drag Yemen into military adventures and regional conflicts, including the threats to close the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, without any regard to the consequences this would have for Yemen, the region, and the global economy. Such actions deepen the subjugation of Yemeni affairs to external forces. These threats are linked to broader attempts to impose a reality that restricts freedom of navigation in vital maritime corridors and to use them as a tool of economic pressure against the international community, particularly in the context of the closure imposed by Iran on the Strait of Hormuz, all in flagrant violation of international law and relevant Security Council resolutions, including resolutions 552 and 2817. My country further stresses the importance of safeguarding maritime security and freedom of navigation in vital waterways, particularly in the Red Sea and the Bab al-Mandeb Strait. We stress our rejection of any threats that undermine the safety of international navigation or that destabilize regional security. In this context, the Kingdom of Bahrain emphasizes that any disruption in these vital passages would undermine humanitarian response efforts, negatively affect regional security and stability, as well as harm global trade and supplies of energy, food, and medicine. The Kingdom also renews its condemnation of the continued arbitrary detention by the Houthi militia of the United Nations staff, diplomatic mission personnel, and workers in non-governmental organizations, and calls for their immediate and unconditional release in accordance with the Security Council Resolution 2813. Third, my country affirms the importance of reaching a comprehensive political settlement in Yemen that ends the crisis in a sustainable manner and preserves its sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity in accordance with agreed international references and relevant security resolutions. Thank you.
Function as a President of the Council, I now give the floor to the representative of Yemen.
اسمحوا لي
Allow me, my dear brother, Ambassador Jamal Al-Ruwa'i, to extend my congratulations to you and the brotherly Kingdom of Bahrain for presiding over the Council during this month. I would like to wish you every success in your duties. I would also like to express my appreciation to your predecessor, the permanent representative of the friendly USA, for the successful presidency of the Council last month. I further extend my thanks to Mr. Hans Gransberg and Mrs. Ida Mosorno for their briefings. Mr. President, our meeting today comes at a time when the region is facing highly complex developments, particularly in light of the unjustified and blatant Iranian attacks targeting the states of the Gulf Cooperation Council and the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. This was a flagrant violation of international law, the provisions of international law, the Charter of the United Nations, and the principles of good neighborliness. These actions reflect the Iranian regime's continued insistence on exporting crises, spreading chaos, and undermining security and stability in the region. The government of Yemen reiterates its firm rejection and strong condemnation of these attacks, including those carried out directly or through proxies and militias affiliated with the Iranian regime. We warn against the continued Iranian interference in Yemen's internal affairs through the financing, arming, and support of the terrorist Houthi militias. They push them to be implicated in regional conflicts that serve Iran's agenda and interests. Such actions aim to undermine state institutions, erode sovereign decision-making, transform Yemeni territory into platforms for extortion, and threaten regional and international peace and security. The implication of the Houthi militias in defending the Iranian regime clearly demonstrates the close linkage between these terrorist militias and the destabilizing Iranian project in the region. Since their coup against constitutional legitimacy and the aspirations of the Yemeni people, the terrorist Houthi militias have persistently opened multiple fronts of war, turning Yemen into an arena for regional conflict in implementation of the Iranian agenda. They are seeking to evade the requirements of peace, prolonging the conflict in order to entrench their control without regard for Yemen's interests, security, or stability. Recent developments confirm that the continued possession by the Houthi militias of weapons and military technology constitutes a fundamental challenge to any future political process. It undermines the foundations of state building and threatens security and stability in Yemen and the wider region. The government of Yemen affirms that any future political process must be based on the restoration of state institutions, the monopoly of arms in the hands of the state, and the end of all forms of armed rebellion. This would ensure the establishment of a political system founded on partnership, respect for national sovereignty, the constitution, and the rule of law. This requires a strong international support to enable the Yemeni government to extend its authority over the entire national territory. It will also put an end to Iranian interference and enhance the prospects for reaching a just and comprehensive political solution in accordance with agreed-upon references for a most Security Council Resolution 2216. Mr. President, with regard to the issue of detainees, prisoners, and abductees, we highly appreciate the efforts led by the United Nations in this important humanitarian track. We reiterate the Yemeni government's strong commitment to ensure its success, for this stems from its firm commitment to alleviating the suffering of dozens of Yemeni families. We hope for a swift implementation of previously agreed upon arrangements, the completion of prisoner exchange agreement, and the release of all detainees, prisoners, and abductees in accordance with the principle of all for all without condition or restriction as stipulated in the Stockholm Agreement. We also hope that this important step will serve as an entry point for closing this humanitarian file and a foundation for building the trust necessary for any comprehensive peace process in Yemen. In this context, we warn against the Houthi militia's intention to take judicial measures through illegitimate courts affiliated with them against abductees, including employees of the United Nations agencies and international and national NGOs, as well as diplomatic missions. This would be a flagrant violation of international humanitarian law and a direct challenge to the appeals of the international community and this esteemed council. We reiterate our demand for their immediate and unconditional release. Mr. President, the Yemeni government continues to build on the progress achieved in the economic recovery and reform plans, including strengthening the independence of the central bank, protecting the national currency, and enhancing oversight institutions, building strong state institutions, ensuring the provision of basic services to citizens, and reinforcing administrative reforms. In this regard, the 2026 general budget has been approved for the first time in years, representing an important milestone in restoring the regular functioning of state institutions and the exercise of its sovereign functions, including the sound planning of public resources and stressing and defining expenditure priorities in accordance with the national vision based on principles of discipline and transparency. In parallel, the government has adopted its program and priorities for 2026. The latter focuses on strategic objectives, including strengthening governance and transparency principles, activating oversight systems, consolidating political and security stability while achieving sustainable economic recovery. It also includes extending state authority and the rule of law while ensuring access to sustainable basic services, access to justice, promoting institutional reform, advancing digital transformation, strengthening social cohesion, and empowering human capital. In this context, we appreciate the fraternal and supportive role played by our brothers in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, including the support of the state budget. This constitutes a fundamental pillar in strengthening the resilience of state institutions. It has helped directly in empowering and enabling the government to fulfill its duties while maintaining economic stability during this highly complex financial and economic phase. The Yemeni government reiterates once again that urgent support from development partners and donor institutions and funds at this stage is a decisive factor in achieving economic stability while enhancing opportunities for economic recovery and development to alleviate the human suffering caused by the war and the destructive practices of the Houthi militias. The government reaffirms its commitment for continued coordination with the international community and donor partners while expanding and developing support mechanisms and channels in a way that would serve the path of economic recovery and alleviate the humanitarian crisis. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Yemen for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite the Council member consultation to continue our discussion on the subject. The meeting